barriers had always been a mystery, ancient in origin, yet humming with technology far beyond humanity's understanding. They formed an invisible shell around the Earth, safeguarding the planet from the incomprehensible horrors of deep space. The constructs weren't natural nor the work of human hands. They were discovered accidentally during the first deep space expeditions, their purpose a grim warning rather than a beacon of hope. Commander Rhea Calder never liked the silence. Orion Station, with its endless corridors and clinical hum of machinery, felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum orbiting the planet. She had been stationed here for 3 years, overseeing the barrier observation program. Her team monitored the faint energy fluctuations of the constructs, ensuring that humanity's shield against the void held firm. At first, it was just a blip, a faint tremor in the readings. Lieutenant Park, the youngest member of her team, had been the one to notice. "It's probably nothing," he had said with a sheepish grin, rubbing the back of his neck. "Solar interference, maybe?" But Rhea knew better. The barriers didn't just falter. If they so much as hiccuped, it meant something significant had happened. By the time the second tremor hit, the blip had grown into a surge. The monitors bathed the observation deck in a harsh red glow as alarms blared. Rhea's stomach knotted. "What's happening?" she barked, her voice slicing through the panic. "Sector 7, Park stammered. "Over the Pacific. Energy levels are dropping. Fast." Admiral Lang's face appeared on the main screen, his expression stony. "Commander Calder, report." "The Pacific barrier is destabilizing, sir," she replied, keeping her tone even despite the rising dread. "We need to send a recon team immediately." Lang frowned. "The barriers are designed to withstand astronomical forces. Whatever this is, it's internal. Your orders are to observe and report, nothing more." "Admiral, if the barrier fails—" "It won't," Lang interrupted, his voice cold. "Focus on your job, Commander." The call ended abruptly, leaving Rhea simmering with frustration. But she knew better than to waste time arguing with bureaucracy. She turned to her team. "Prep the drones. We'll get our answers one way or another." The footage from the drones was worse than she expected. The Pacific Ocean churned as if alive, the water forming spiraling vortices that defied natural laws. At the center of it all was a structure, a mass of organic matter, writhing and pulsating like a beating heart. It had pierced the barrier, its tendrils coiling and spreading like veins across the ocean floor. Rhea felt a cold sweat break out as she leaned closer to the screen. "Magnify," she ordered. The image sharpened, revealing smaller shapes moving along the tendrils, spindly, spider-like creatures with glistening, translucent bodies. One of the drones ventured too close. A tendril lashed out, ensnaring it in a single fluid motion. The feed went dark. "Commander," Park whispered, his voice trembling. "What are those things?" Rhea didn't answer. Her mind was already racing, trying to piece together what she had just seen. The barriers were failing, and something alive had breached them, something that didn't belong on Earth. By the time she returned to her quarters, her comm device was buzzing with urgent messages. Cities along the Pacific Rim were reporting strange phenomena: dead fish washing ashore in massive numbers, birds fleeing inland, and tremors that defied geological explanation. She was called back to the observation deck within an hour. A recon team was being assembled, and Rhea was ordered to lead it. "This isn't just a mission," Lang said over the briefing. "It's containment. Whatever you find, ensure it doesn't spread." They launched at dawn, their transport cutting through the atmosphere with an eerie silence. The team was small, 4 specialists, each handpicked for their expertise. As they descended toward the Pacific, the water below churned violently, the air heavy with an unnatural static. The sight that greeted them on the ground was worse than the drone footage. The organic structure had grown, its tendrils reaching the shoreline. Black ichor dripped from its surface, hissing as it met the water. The smaller creatures scuttled along the beach, their translucent forms shimmering in the dim light. One of them stopped, its eyeless head tilting toward the team as if sensing their presence. "Hold your fire," Rhea ordered, her voice tight. But it was too late. A rookie soldier panicked and pulled the trigger, the gunshot echoing across the beach. The creature let out a high-pitched screech, and within seconds more emerged from the tendrils, swarming toward them. The team opened fire, but the creatures were relentless. They moved with unnatural speed, their limbs bending in ways that defied biology. One leapt onto the medic, its spindly legs piercing his chest. Rhea watched in horror as the man's body convulsed, his veins blackening before her eyes. His screams turned guttural, inhuman, as his body twisted and morphed into something grotesque, a hybrid of man and parasite. "Fall back!" Rhea shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. The team retreated to the transport, but not before losing 2 more members. As they lifted off, Rhea looked back at the shoreline. The infected medic stood among the creatures, his eyes vacant, his body unrecognizable. The organic structure loomed behind him, pulsating with a sickening rhythm. The barriers had failed, and Earth was no longer alone. Rhea's return to Orion Station was met with a wall of disbelief. The footage from her recon mission was undeniable. The barriers were not only compromised, but irreversibly damaged. Yet, in the sterile, brightly lit halls of the station, the urgency of what she had seen seemed muted. Military personnel moved about with forced calm, as if pretending it wasn't real could make it go away. Admiral Lang's office was cramped, his desk cluttered with half-empty coffee cups and data pads. He barely looked up as Rhea entered, her face pale and clothes still flecked with the black ichor from the beach. "You were supposed to assess, not provoke," Lang said coldly, sliding a data pad across his desk. "Now the world knows we've got a situation." Rhea slammed her palm against the desk, her temper flaring. "Those things attacked us unprovoked. This isn't a situation, Admiral. It's an invasion. If we don't act now, containment won't be an option." Lang's eyes narrowed. "We're not launching orbital strikes without confirmation of scale. Panic on a global level will kill more people than the creatures." "You think this is about public perception?" she snapped. "We've already lost control of the Pacific. How long before these things spread to other continents? Hours? Days?" The Admiral leaned back in his chair, unfazed. "You have your orders, Commander. Stand down." Rhea clenched her fists, her mind racing. There was no time for bureaucratic paralysis. As she left Lang's office, Park intercepted her in the corridor, his face pale. "We found something," he said in a low voice, glancing around nervously. "In Dr. Voss's lab, Dr. Elias Voss had been the station's lead xenobiologist, a brilliant but eccentric figure known for his obsession with the barriers. Rhea hadn't seen him since the crisis began. Following Park to the lab, she noticed how eerily quiet the station felt, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. The lab was in shambles. Papers and equipment littered the floor, and the monitors displayed corrupted data streams. At the center of the chaos was a shattered containment pod, its glass smeared with what looked like dried blood. Park handed her a data pad, his hands trembling. "It's encrypted," he said. "But look at this." The screen displayed a series of schematics, blueprints of the barriers. Rhea's heart sank as she recognized modifications, subtle changes that disrupted their energy flow. There was no doubt about it. Someone had tampered with the constructs. "Voss did this?" she asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and anger. Park nodded. "There's more. He left a recording." With a sinking feeling, Rhea tapped the screen. Voss's face appeared, his normally calm demeanor replaced by a manic energy. His voice was ragged, his words tumbling out in a feverish rush. "They aren't invaders," he said. "Not in the way you think. They're a higher life form, something beyond us. The barriers weren't meant to keep them out. They were meant to keep us in, to stifle our evolution." Rhea felt her stomach turn as Voss continued. "I've studied their biology. They adapt, improve. They're not here to destroy. They're here to ascend. We've stagnated for too long. They'll force us to change, to grow beyond our limitations. It's not an invasion, it's a gift." The recording ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in the lab. Rhea stared at the screen, her mind reeling. Voss hadn't just tampered with the barriers, he'd invited these creatures in. He thought he was saving humanity, but all he'd done was doom it. Park spoke, his voice shaking. "What do we do?" "We find him," Rhea said, her jaw tight. "And we stop this before it gets worse." The search for Voss led them to the lower levels of the station, where maintenance tunnels twisted like a labyrinth. The air was damp and cold, the hum of machinery echoing off the walls. Rhea felt a growing sense of unease as they moved deeper, her hand hovering near her weapon. They found him in an auxiliary lab hunched over a terminal. The room was filled with samples, small, writhing creatures contained in reinforced glass. Voss didn't look up as they entered, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Step away from the terminal," Rhea ordered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Voss glanced over his shoulder, a strange smile on his face. "You don't understand, Commander. They're not our enemy." "Look around you," she snapped. "People are dying. Cities are falling. You've unleashed hell." Voss shook his head, almost pitying. "No, I've given us a chance to transcend. You're clinging to an old paradigm, but the future is here, whether you like it or not." Rhea raised her weapon. "This is your last warning." Before she could act, Voss pressed a button on the terminal. An alarm blared as the containment pods in the room began to hiss and crack. The creatures inside thrashed violently, their translucent bodies shimmering as they expanded. "Get out!" Rhea shouted, grabbing Park and dragging him toward the door. The creatures broke free, their high-pitched screeches echoing through the lab. Voss didn't flinch as one latched onto his arm, its tendrils burrowing into his flesh. His eyes widened, his expression one of ecstasy rather than pain. "They'll show you," he whispered as his body began to change. "They'll show you everything." Rhea fired a shot into the control panel, triggering a security lockdown. The blast doors slammed shut, sealing Voss and the creatures inside. The last thing she saw was his face, contorted into something inhuman. Back on the observation deck, Rhea reviewed the damage. Voss was gone, but his work had already spread. More barriers were collapsing, and the creatures were multiplying. The station was in chaos, with reports of attacks coming from across the globe. Lang's voice crackled over the intercom, demanding answers, but Rhea had none. All she could think about was Voss's final words, the fanatic gleam in his eyes. The barriers were falling, and the world was running out of time. The days following Voss's betrayal were a blur of chaos. Rhea sat in the cramped confines of the Orion Station war room, the glow of holographic displays casting eerie shadows across her face. The barriers were failing faster than anyone had predicted. Red alerts flashed across the map: Tokyo, Sydney, Los Angeles, Jakarta. The creatures were everywhere now, spreading like a virus. Reports streamed in from the surface, each more horrifying than the last. Entire neighborhoods consumed by writhing organic structures. Streets choked with infected civilians, their bodies twisted into grotesque forms. Military strikes had proven ineffective. Bullets barely slowed the creatures, and explosives only seemed to accelerate their growth. Rhea's team had been reduced to a skeleton crew. Park sat beside her, his face pale, as he listened to the latest transmission from the Tokyo Resistance. "They've lost contact with the harbor," he murmured. "The tendrils are moving inland." Admiral Lang's voice cut through the static, harsh and commanding. "Commander Calder, your team is being deployed to Tokyo. We've identified a central structure, possibly a hive mind. Destroy it, and we might slow the spread." Rhea clenched her jaw. "With respect, Admiral, sending a small team into the heart of the outbreak is suicide." "We don't have a choice," Lang replied. "Containment has failed. This is our last shot before the entire region is overrun." The briefing ended abruptly, leaving Rhea to gather her thoughts. She couldn't shake the image of Voss's twisted grin, his words echoing in her mind. "They're not here to destroy. They're here to ascend." The drop into Tokyo was silent. The transport shuddered as it pierced the thick, green-tinged clouds. Below, the city was unrecognizable. Skyscrapers jutted out from a sea of organic matter, their glass facades coated in a slick, black substance. Tendrils wound through the streets, pulsating with a sickly rhythm. Fires burned in the distance, casting an orange glow over the alien landscape. The team landed on what had once been a bustling thoroughfare. Now it was a graveyard. Cars sat abandoned, their windows shattered. Bodies littered the ground, some partially consumed by the encroaching tendrils. The air was thick with a foul stench, a mix of decay and something metallic. "Stay sharp," Rhea ordered, her voice low. She led the team through the debris, their weapons at the ready. The hive structure loomed in the distance, a towering mass of pulsating flesh and sinew. It pulsed like a heart, each beat sending tremors through the ground. As they moved closer, the first wave of creatures emerged, smaller than the ones Rhea had encountered at the Pacific Breach, but faster. Their translucent bodies shimmered in the dim light, their claws clicking against the pavement. "Open fire!" she shouted, and the air filled with the deafening roar of gunfire. The creatures shrieked as they fell, their bodies dissolving into pools of black ichor. But for every one they killed, two more took its place. They fought their way through the swarm, the team's numbers dwindling with each encounter. By the time they reached the base of the hive, only Rhea Park and Dr. Mina Akari remained. The scientist had insisted on joining the mission, her expertise crucial to understanding the creatures. "This is it," Akari said, her voice trembling. "If we destroy the central spire, it should disrupt the tendrils' growth." Rhea nodded, setting the charges while Park kept watch. The interior of the hive was worse than she had imagined. The walls were lined with what looked like cocoons, each containing a human figure. Some were fully formed, their faces twisted in silent agony. Others were still transforming, their limbs elongating, their features distorting into something monstrous. As Rhea planted the final charge, she heard a sound that froze her blood, a low, guttural growl. Turning, she saw a massive creature emerging from the shadows. Unlike the others, this one was humanoid, its form a grotesque fusion of flesh and metal. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its movements were deliberate, almost calculated. "Run!" she shouted, but it was too late. The creature lunged, its claws slicing through Park's chest. He crumpled to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Rhea fired at the creature, the bullets barely slowing it down. Akari scrambled to arm the detonator, her hands shaking. "Go!" she screamed. "I'll finish this." "No!" Rhea grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the console. "We do this together." The creature roared, its voice a chilling blend of human and alien. Rhea fired again, aiming for its glowing eyes. The creature staggered, giving Akari just enough time to activate the charges. 10 seconds, Akari shouted. "We have to move." They sprinted toward the exit, the ground shaking beneath their feet. The creature followed, its heavy footsteps echoing through the hive. Rhea glanced over her shoulder, firing one last shot before the charges detonated. The explosion ripped through the hive, sending a shock wave that knocked them off their feet. The creature let out a final, anguished cry as the flames consumed it. Rhea and Akari crawled out of the wreckage, coughing and covered in soot. For a moment, there was silence. The hive was gone, its tendrils reduced to smoldering ash. But as Rhea looked up at the sky, her relief turned to dread. The clouds were darker now, swirling with an unnatural energy. The spores were spreading, carried by the wind to other parts of the globe. Akari sank to her knees, her face pale. "We were too late," she whispered. Rhea didn't respond. She knew the truth. The spread couldn't be stopped. The world as they knew it was gone. All they could do now was survive. The world was burning. From the cockpit of the evac ship, Rhea watched as flames consumed Tokyo. The organic spires that once clawed toward the sky were now crumbling, their destruction leaving behind massive craters filled with smoldering ash. For a fleeting moment, the city seemed to regain a semblance of humanity. The hive was destroyed, its tendrils severed, but the cost was immeasurable. Millions dead, millions more lost to the infection. Dr. Akari sat slumped beside her, staring at the floor with vacant eyes. Her hands trembled, black ichor staining her fingertips from handling the charges. "We stopped nothing," she whispered. "We only delayed it." Rhea didn't respond. Her thoughts were consumed by the sight outside the window. In the distance, faint plumes of smoke marked the locations of other hives rising across the globe. The spores carried on the wind had taken root elsewhere. The planet was transforming into something alien, one piece at a time. The radio crackled with faint voices, distress calls, military orders, prayers, all blended together in a symphony of despair. Rhea turned it off, unable to bear the weight of their pleas. She had failed them all. The evac ship docked with Orion Station, now operating as a last bastion of human resistance. Its halls were crowded with refugees, scientists, soldiers, and civilians lucky enough to escape. The station smelled of sweat and fear, the air heavy with unspoken truths. Everyone knew Earth was lost, but no one dared to say it aloud. Rhea stepped into the war room, her boots echoing on the metal floor. Admiral Lang was there, flanked by his remaining officers. His face was pale, his usual stoic demeanor cracked by exhaustion. He gestured to a holographic map where clusters of red dots marked the planet. The spread was exponential. "We're running out of time," Lang said, his voice hoarse. "The hives are evolving faster than we can counter them. We have one option left." Rhea didn't ask what it was. She could see the answer in his eyes, a desperation she had never seen before. "Project Black Sun," Lang continued. "The orbital strike array. If we target the largest hives, we might slow their growth long enough to evacuate more survivors." "And what about the people still down there?" Rhea asked, her voice cold. "You're talking about glassing entire cities." Lang's gaze didn't waver. "They're already dead." The room fell silent, the weight of his words suffocating. Rhea turned away, staring out the observation window at the planet below. Blue and green were giving way to sickly shades of black and gray. It wasn't Earth anymore. It was something else, something hungry. Dr. Akari appeared at her side, clutching a data pad. "There's something you need to see," she said, her voice unsteady. Rhea followed her to the lab, where the remaining scientists were huddled around a monitor. On the screen was a magnified image of the spores, shimmering crystalline structures that pulsed with an internal light. "They're not just adapting," Akari said. "They're communicating. Across continents, across barriers. It's a single organism, Rhea. Everything we've fought, it's all connected." The revelation hit like a punch to the gut. Destroying the hives hadn't slowed the infection. It had taught the organism to grow stronger. Each loss had been a lesson, each strike a challenge to overcome. And now, it was everywhere. Lang's voice boomed over the intercom, summoning everyone to the command deck. When Rhea and Akari arrived, the Admiral was staring at the map, his expression grim. "The orbital strike array is ready," he said. "We're targeting the largest hives, Tokyo, Los Angeles, Moscow. It's not a solution, but it's all we have." Rhea felt a surge of anger. "You're just stalling," she said. "This thing is smarter than we are. It's outpacing us at every turn." "What do you suggest?" Lang snapped. "That we do nothing?" "I suggest we stop pretending we can win this," she shot back. "Evacuate who we can and cut our losses." Lang's fists clenched, but before he could respond, an alarm blared. The room filled with red light as a voice announced, "Infection detected on Orion Station. All personnel to lockdown procedures." Panic erupted. Rhea's blood ran cold as she turned to Akari. How? Akari's face was ashen. The spores, they're airborne. The infected were already moving through the station, their distorted screams echoing through the halls. Soldiers formed barricades, but it was futile. The creatures moved with horrifying speed, tearing through defenses like paper. Refugees screamed as they were dragged into the shadows, their bodies twisting into grotesque forms. Rhea led a group toward the command deck, her mind racing. She knew what had to be done, but the thought of it made her stomach turn. Reaching the central console, she activated the station's self-destruct sequence. "What are you doing?" Lang demanded, his voice rising. "We're out of options," she replied, her hands steady on the controls. "If this station falls, the infection spreads to the entire solar system." Lang stared at her, his expression a mix of fury and resignation. Finally, he nodded. "Do it." The countdown began. 10 minutes. The survivors rushed to the evac ships, but the infected were relentless. Rhea and Akari stayed behind, holding the line as long as they could. Akari screamed as a creature lunged at her, its claws raking across her chest. Rhea shot it point blank, but it was too late. Akari fell to her knees, blood pooling beneath her. She looked up at Rhea, tears streaming down her face. "Finish it," she whispered. "Don't let them win." Rhea stood alone as the final evac ship departed, the infected closing in. The self-destruct countdown echoed in her ears, each second a drumbeat of inevitability. She raised her weapon, firing until the magazine clicked empty. The creatures swarmed her, their claws tearing into her flesh, but she didn't scream. She had no voice left. The last thing Rhea saw was the planet below, shrouded in darkness, before the station exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The infection had claimed Earth, but it would go no further. In the cold silence of space, the Earth continued to turn, its surface unrecognizable. The spores had won. Humanity had fallen. But in her final moments, Rhea found solace in one simple truth. She had fought until the very end.